Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be, wherever you are in the world. Welcome and thank you for joining us today on our webinar, Accelerate Your Journey to DevOps. I'm Randy Russell. I'm the Director of Certification at Red Hat, and we are going to be talking about DevOps today. Now, if some of you may have joined me on a webinar last fall, you might recall that I had a discussion about next generation architecture. And it was really my stealth DevOps webinar, but I didn't want to call it DevOps because I felt like our story was emerging at that time. So I had some directions that I thought we were looking at, some trends that Red Hat as a company was taking and that a lot of our customers were taking. And I wanted to sort of chart what I saw as the beginning of the way. But, some interesting things have happened since then. And some things have coalesced. And, I think that a discussion about DevOps and how to accelerate your journey is an appropriate thing to talk about now. And, I emphasize accelerate your journey because, as we'll see in a minute, DevOps is not an absolute. It's not a binary choice. Either you are or you're not. That it is, in fact, a continuum. And so what I want to try to talk to about today is, first of all, a little bit of an understanding about what we're talking about when we talk about DevOps, because we hear this term used a lot. And sometimes it's used in some very high-level sort of ways that you really have no tangible sense about what it is that we're talking about. So I want to demystify the term a little bit, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal perspective on basically what it means in some very specific sort of ways. And then I want to actually introduce you to a new technology in the Red Hat portfolio that is actually very key to DevOps. And we'll have a guest speaker who will share a little bit of information about this very compelling technology. So without further ado, let's talk about DevOps. What is it? Well, I think most of us on this call at least know the derivation of the term. It comes from developer operations. Now, what it is it's a philosophy for which the aim is to hasten the pace at which applications and features move successfully, move successfully from development to end users, and note that seems to be on a switch for me every time here. The purpose of it here is to, move things successfully and quickly, right? So it's not enough to be able to say, well, we're going to have a critical application for our business move from an idea in the developer's head or perhaps a bug fix out into the world without without having it blow up, basically, right? So, by this I mean, let's say we have a feature that needs to be added to an application, okay? How do we move that feature in that application from the development process to the build and QA process, where we're, sort of ensuring that it actually works, and into the production environment? How do we do that quickly and efficiently? And the reason this is quickly and efficiently and, of course, successfully are important is because right now companies are faced with a real challenge. Okay, everybody is walking around with their their own mobile phone, their pad. We're continually connected to the apps that we use and consider important. We're conducting our commerce on them. Basically these are at the core of, everybody's business now. And everybody is competing in terms of features and functionality, right? So, if you're somebody who doesn't have too many airline frequent flyer miles and you're out in the market willing to buy from one airline for one trip and a different airline for another, you might actually make a decision about who you book based on who has the better app, right? Who has the better features. So being able to get those features out in the market quickly is critically important as a competitive aspect. And so this is what's sort of informing the whole DevOps movement is how do we get those features out in the hands of end users quickly and successfully? And, when you think about some of the, the online retailers, you think about some of the big social media organizations, this is a continual process for them where they are, always trying to get a lot of changes out. In fact, the number of changes that will get checked in and pushed to production by a company like Amazon, for example, are mind-boggling. You have to have a method. You have to have a way of doing it. So DevOps is sort of the philosophy, a set of practices, and so on that lend itself to moving that feature, that application, that bug fix, whatever it might be, very efficiently and quickly through the delivery pipeline from the hands of the developer to the hands of the user. Now, a few things that it's not. DevOps is not a clearly defined discrete end state. It's a philosophy about process, okay? It's an approach to how you build efficiencies into the process by moving things through that process, by automating, by the tooling that you choose to use, even the way you might develop your application, okay? It's not a product or tool. We're going to talk about a great product today that lends itself incredibly to DevOps, okay? But buying that product or any product does not mean you are now doing DevOps, okay? It's not a tool. It's not a product. It's an approach to using technology and, process to achieve a certain end, right? It's not a single person's job. That's one of the things that I find is one of the biggest misconceptions is there's somebody that we need to hire, the DevOps guy, who's going to make all this happen. Properly understood, DevOps is a cross-functional and cross-department endeavor, okay? It is not a single person's job. There might be somebody who is gluing all that together. There is somebody who might be at the nexus of all that DevOps activity, but it is properly understood a cross-functional and cross-departmental endeavor because it's going to require the developers to buy into it. It's going to require the test and build folks to buy into it. It's going to require the production folks to buy into it. And as we'll see shortly, communication among those different groups and other groups is going to be critical to making that actually happen. And then last, and very importantly, I would encourage everybody listening today to avoid thinking about DevOps as that binary condition. Either we're doing DevOps or we're not doing DevOps. It really isn't. There is a continuum of behaviors and conditions, and an organization is somewhere on that continuum. And so again, some of those big online retailers, the big social media houses, they're very far out on that continuum towards DevOps. There's a lot of organizations that are, have applications they've had for years, very large monolithic ones. They have a very deliberate, slow, sort of process to bring things from, a change from the developer to the end user, okay? Doesn't mean that they're not anywhere on this continuum. They're just at the other end from those, those social media sites and so on. So let me elaborate on that a little bit more. The delivery pipeline continuum. So this is the way I like to frame it here, is that it is this sort of continuous line where on one end, we have the way a lot of IT organizations have worked for a very long time. They have monolithic applications. They're provisioning environments, whether it's for test and build or whether, it's something that the developer is trying things out on, or certainly in production. They're provisioning their environments in relatively manual ways. Their build and test process might be something that's very manual. To move something from the developer to test and QA, in fact, even test and QA has to be broken up into a test process, and a QA process. Every one of those moves from one step to another and finally to production is requiring a manual step. Okay. Now, understand that even at the other end of the continuum, sometimes there is a choice made that something is going to be a manual step. And this goes to my point that it's never either or. But again, thinking about this sort of left side of the continuum, we have more manual steps. We have more manual decisions. We have more reliance on somebody doing the thing that moves it from step A to step B. And what this adds up to is that longer time from concept to delivery. And here concept means it's a new feature, it's a bug fix, it's a net new application. But then at the other end of that continuum, we have sort of what we associate with the DevOps world, where instead of a monolithic application, we break that application up into microservices that can be managed as smaller chunks of code. We have more automated environment provisioning. Build and test is something that happens as though by magic. Well, of course, it's not magic because somebody has automated that process. There's an automated push from the time that a developer checks in their code, through the test and build process, possibly even into production. And what this adds up to, because of all that automation, what it adds up to is a shorter time from concept to delivery. And therein lies the key, because if we're thinking about what organizations want to do, I don't know that every organization wants to be a high-flying social media company in terms of how they handle their applications. It might not even be appropriate, right? But I will not go too far out on a limb to say that all organizations would like to see a shorter time from concept to delivery, okay? Whatever that might be. If you are, if you're a bank, you might not have the same perspective on what shorter is that a social media organization does. But whatever your concept of time is, you want it to be less, okay? You want to be out there quicker because, again, you have to be competitive. All right. So there's a couple of principles here that I think make DevOps, that is this, hastening of the process, the gaining of efficiencies possible. And all of these things, overlaying them, is automation, okay? That's the thing that has to be understood as being in this picture for my three principles that I'm putting forward here, is it's all about automation. So the common platform means we would like, in principle, to have, every step of the way using a common architecture that we're running that application on. Why? Well, so that we don't get surprised, okay? We don't get surprised when we move it from step to step to step. Continuous integration means that there is a process by which when changes are checked in to, a code repository, that they're getting built and that there's an automated process for getting them built and that they're then, automatically tested, that whatever sort of test harness is put together to test that application, that it just does it, right? That you don't have a guy who is now going to build and then a guy who is going to do the test process, that you want to automate that process. And then continuous delivery is where you take that additional step and say, okay, the application has now gone through this automated continuous integration, through this, build of the newest feature, test of the newest feature. It's validated as good. Let's move it into production. And again, let's make that simple. Let's not make it an act of Congress to move it from the QA team into production. Let's just move it there. Okay, now that's one of those steps, again, that there's going to be organizations that will say, we're going to automate that. We're just going to say we are confident enough in our automation, in our test and build, that we are simply going to move that feature right into production. There's going to be others that are going to say, you know what, we want to make a deliberate choice. But, again, it's on that continuum, with the effort being how do we make it as simple as possible to go from that tested and QA build of the app to getting it actually into production and into the user's hands. Now, for today, I'm going to focus a little bit on the common platform piece, okay? Because the idea here is going to fit in very well with what we're going to discuss in a minute. So the idea with common platform is ideally when a developer is saying, well, let me, they work in their IDE, they put in their new feature, they run it. They should be running it perhaps in an environment that's very much like what it would be like to run it in production. Why? Well, so that we don't have that situation where, it doesn't work in production and they go back to the developer and say, well, the developer says, well, it works for me. You want to eliminate the variables, right? And similarly, when we're doing test and QA, and building, let's do that again on a platform that's similar to what we're doing in production, so that it's, we don't have those variables. We don't have those things that are going to throw us off and make it so that we are surprised by changes because of the because of changes in platform. And the thing about it is there are a number of technologies that Red Hat offers that in one way or another facilitate this idea of a common platform. Okay, for example, OpenShift Enterprise, I would say the fundamental precept of OpenShift Enterprise as it exists today, as a containerized approach to platform as a service, is this idea that, you have a container, you move the container, and the container basically is your common platform, right? So that's a very effective way to do this. I can think of other ways to do this as well. Now, but there is one thing that I have to point out, though. All of this sounds great, but back here in the real world, a common platform from development through test and QA to production is the exception. It's not the rule, okay? It would be nice if it's the rule, and a net new company starting out perhaps should start out with that thought in mind about let's make it that way. Or if there's a net new project or set of projects or initiatives within an organization, there might be some scope for saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it. But the reality is, in the world today, that there isn't that common platform, okay? Furthermore, you have a lot of hands involved in, quote unquote, the platform, because there's actually different pieces here, right? So you have your developer team, you have the systems and the systems they use, you have your test and QA teams and the systems they use. Probably your application talks to a database somewhere. That's a pretty good bet. Or something that's similar to a database. And there's a team around that and their systems and their approach, right? We have network teams. Let's not forget about them. We think about the application, and it's, the application itself, perhaps the platform or application server that's used. We think perhaps even about at the OS level, but it's got to run across a network too. So the network team comes into play. And then, of course, there's the actual production environment. So you've got all these teams that have all these systems, and we don't necessarily have that common platform. In fact, it's the exception, not the rule. And very often what we have is something that I've described here by this piece of art by a pair from Switzerland called Fischli and Weiss, where, as you can see, you've got this very strange balancing act where something's being held up by a fan and held down by a rock. And it's, I think this sometimes corresponds more to the world than the abstract of the common platform that I've described sometimes. So let me revisit my three principles here. Instead of saying we have a common platform, it might be more appropriate for most organizations. Again, I think the common platform is a great goal, but for the reality of most organizations that are looking at DevOps saying we want to get further on that continuum, I'm going to say let's have a normalized environment. And I'm borrowing a term from the world of math and statistics when I talk normalized. By normalized, I mean we are conforming to some norm, to some standard, right? That there is a way of taking things that are disparate, So in the world of math and statistics, it's maybe disparate sets of data, and making it so that they are all sort of in a common way of being expressed. Okay, so for example, if you're doing a statistical analysis, you don't want to have some measurements in kilometers and others in centimeters side by side. You want to standardize on a single measure there. And by that same token, I'm proposing that the common platform might not be what we can achieve today in some environments, but what we can do is normalize them. We can get to where there's a methodology and approach and tooling to actually get it to where, even though they're not a common platform, their behavior is sufficiently common that you can actually sort of achieve that DevOps motion down the continuum, right? So that's the idea here. Now, with that in mind, I want to mention that last fall, Red Hat acquired Ansible. Ansible is a company that produces a configuration automation tool. It is also a language, and we also have a user interface called Ansible Tower. The reason I bring up Ansible here is because Ansible can be a critical part of this process if you are one of those organizations out there wanting to get into DevOps, wanting to hasten that delivery pipeline, but at the same time, you don't have that common platform and you need to find a way to get that process automated and efficient, and you need a way to get all those different teams that I mentioned on the previous slide talking and working together. And so, with that, I'm going to introduce today's guest speaker, the tall tree of technology, the avatar of automation, Mr. Justin Nemers, who is the product owner of Ansible. And I'm hoping Justin can share a little bit of information about this really compelling technology and specifically how it does address some of these kinds of needs within an organization that wants to move to a more DevOps model. So Justin, if you would.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you for that most glowing of introductions, probably one of the better ones I've had. So
my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks everyone. What I really want to do is a couple of things. First, let's set the stage a little bit and talk about kind of what Ansible is, and then we're going to go into some details as to how Ansible specifically can help organizations move along this DevOps continuum that Randy is so eloquently talking about. So as Randy indicated, Ansible is kind of three things. Ansible is a language that is written in these things called playbooks, and playbooks are able to perfectly describe all aspects of your infrastructure. So they can be very long and describe entire applications end to end, or they can be shorter and describe certain components or sections of your infrastructure, network, applications, and so forth. But the point is that those files called playbooks are actually then interpreted by another thing called Ansible, which is the actual underlying automation engine. So Ansible is both a language as well as the automation engine that runs these human-readable and machine-readable playbooks in your environment. And then finally, we have this thing called Tower. Tower is really what operationalizes Ansible and makes it much more applicable and effective in enterprise IT environments. So moving forward, let's talk a little bit more about what Ansible is. So Ansible is three things. It's simple, and it's powerful, and it's agentless. Now, the simplicity is incredibly and critically important to what we're able to do for IT organizations. The challenge with automation in general is that very frequently, teams that are implementing automation or trying to move along the DevOps continuum frequently have a very small number of people on their team that are well enough versed in the selected automation platform that ultimately those team members have to spend a bunch of time automating what everyone else is doing. The challenge is that most of these automation platforms and most of the mechanisms that customers are using to implement DevOps are too complex or require very highly specialized set of skills in order for all users to actually be able to access these things. So Ansible is quite a bit different in that front. Ansible, from the get-go, was targeted to be extraordinarily simple, to the point where anyone in your IT organization is able to use it. And that simplicity is important for a number of reasons. One, it doesn't just mean that everyone can use it, but what it means is that individuals are able to control what it is that they do and then make those automations available to other people in a repeatable manner. And that's a very important critical aspect of this. The second piece is that it means you can get started with Ansible very quickly. It doesn't require significant amounts of effort to ramp yourself up. You can download it for free and begin using it almost immediately. We've got a lot of resources out there to help you. Now, what's interesting about that is simple is really great. So everyone can start using it really quickly. It's got a rapid time to value, and most people that start to poke at it will be doing real work within just a couple of hours. And there's certainly ways to even accelerate that. But the problem with simplicity is if it's not also very powerful, then you're missing out on what the overall platform would be able to provide. So Ansible, in addition to being incredibly simple, is extraordinarily powerful. Our architecture is built in a highly modular capacity, which allows us to continually add new functionality in the form of Ansible modules, of which we ship roughly 450 or so today, and there are many thousands more available in the overall community. But the key here is that the modules are what allow you to abstract complexity out of the things you're automating. So if I were to look at the typical IT enterprise environment, you have a bunch of existing infrastructure and existing applications and existing processes and existing methodologies, and you would like to automate those in a simple language that can perfectly describe all of those very complex and underlying components. The power of Ansible allows you to do that very easily. So we're not going to go into any significant detail here on what playbooks look like and how that you call the modules and whatnot, but suffice to say, the modular nature of Ansible allows you to always define more and more and more about your entire stack within playbooks and Ansible roles. And then finally, it's agentless. So the power of agentless is not to be undone because it is incredibly important when you start to look at existing infrastructures. Installing and maintaining agents across existing IT is an incredible challenge. First and foremost, you often have to get new ports opened on firewalls. You have to make potential software changes on the local systems that you're managing. You have to install applications and you have to install additional stuff on those systems. So the barrier to entry, the burden, the activation burden that it takes to use an automation platform that has an agent is incredibly challenging because you can't just start to use it. And Ansible delivers all of its capabilities in a completely agentless fashion. We can automate across anything that talks either SSH or WinRM. So these are two transport protocols that are industry standard. They're widely deployed. One could argue universally deployed. And of course, they're trusted. These are things you're already using today, which means you don't have to go through a bunch of hoops in order to begin to automate and use Ansible. So what does this start to look like when you go to deploy it in an environment? Well, as Randy had indicated, when we start to talk about not just a common platform, but really a normalized platform, what we're really doing is talking about automation. So when you start to look at something like Ansible, because everyone in your team is able to use it, you begin to gain these new freedoms of expression and these new freedoms of definition across your entire organization. So often what we see with organizations that have begun to use Ansible is it often happens on just one team. So whether it's the management or the IT operations team, perhaps it's the outsourcer that's using it to deploy instances and manage those. It could even be the development team who is just tired of having to go through a bunch of manual steps each and every time they go to do something. But what we would argue, and many customers would agree, that when you begin to define all of these different layers of your infrastructure with Ansible, a couple of really cool things happen. So first and foremost is it becomes very easy for you to begin to share what it is that you do in a way that is perfectly repeatable in other aspects of your environment or other areas of your IT organization while still maintaining pretty strict control over what it is you're doing. So if you think about this, if you're the IT operations guy, you don't want anyone to be able to make modifications to the playbooks or to the environment that you're tasked with maintaining. But you might very well want to provide access to the playbooks that define the production environment to the development folks so that when they're doing their actual app development on their workstation laptop or in a cloud instance or another Vert instance somewhere, you want to be sure that they're doing that development on a system that exactly mirrors and replicates what is available in production. So Ansible gives you a very easy way to effectively communicate what's actually happening across all of these teams. So Team A has the ability to know what Team B is doing, but more importantly, has the ability to perfectly replicate what Team B is doing. And then as Team B modifies their approach or modifies those playbooks, the first team gains access to those and can easily apply those changes to their existing environment. And then if you look the other way, so now you have developers that are developing their application and capability on a system that exactly mimics production. Perhaps they can begin to define their playbook or define the method to deploy that application in a playbook, and then they provide the application code as well as the playbook back to the QA folks, who can then test the deployment of it in a much more succinct manner and ultimately approve or reject it based on whether or not it works. So even in a scenario where you've implemented no DevOps, just giving your individual siloed teams the ability to more effectively communicate in a repeatable and perfect manner what it is they're doing to everyone else in the organization is hugely powerful and will absolutely open up additional avenues to move along the DevOps continuum and begin to manage your existing technologies and your existing environment in a much more DevOps-ish manner or DevOps-friendly manner. So we talked ever so briefly about this thing Tower. So it's important to note that Tower is a whole lot more than just a user interface. So the fundamental tenet of Ansible is that it is a distributed architecture. So any system in your environment that has the Ansible executables installed, has playbooks, and has a user that has credentials to access other systems in your environment could potentially manage that environment. And the problem there is that it lacks the type of controls and auditing that is typically required or really important in IT enterprise environments. And furthermore, it also lacks the single point of entry and the single point of knowledge about what automations are occurring in the environment. And that's where Tower comes in. So Tower allows you to layer in control, gain significant knowledge of, and then delegate appropriate access to various parts of your environment very quickly and very succinctly. So control is important because it re-centralizes all of the Ansible execution and allows those teams to gain safe and trusted access to other automations in the environment that they can only apply to organizations or particular IT environments that they're supposed to have access to. Then you need to understand the knowledge. You need to know exactly who's doing what, when they did it, how long it took, what systems they affected, what the changes that were made on those remote systems. So all that information certainly is available on the Ansible command line, but it's just that. Once that command line output scrolls out, unless you've purposefully dumped it to something else, you lose it. So Ansible Tower captures and stores this and allows you to further report on it and audit it and look into it and just have a general understanding of what's actually occurring. And then finally, delegation. So one of the challenges in these environments is that if you're a production admin, the last thing you want to do is expose credentials necessary for either cloud or Vert platform access and certainly root access on systems. You don't want to expose those credentials to your end users. So Ansible and Ansible Tower together give you the ability to tightly control in a non-recoverable manner access to the various credentials that are necessary to automate in your environment. And that, coupled with this kind of single point of command for Ansible in your environment, come together to create a very powerful platform that presents not just a user interface to your end users, but also an API that allows Ansible and Ansible Tower to very easily plug into other parts of your infrastructure and other things that would perhaps in an automated fashion reach into Ansible and do things. But then again, it absolutely also gives you the ability to easily interface with the Ansible playbooks in a much more graphical manner. So
Justin,
yes, sir.
So let me pause for just a minute because we have a couple of questions that I kind of wanted to address right off. And so first, uh, you know, we have the question posed: how is Ansible different from Puppet and Chef?
Yeah, great question. So Ansible is a number of things simultaneously. First and foremost, it's an orchestration engine. And it's important to note when you're looking at a DevOps infrastructure, a DevOps continuum, uh, everything is more than just a configuration. What you need is something that can define not just a configuration, but how those configurations interact with one another. So we have many customers that are using Ansible open source and Ansible Tower to manage DevOps environments that are using things like Puppet and Chef to do that actual configuration management. What's important here is that Ansible is a language that allows you to describe your environment in a multi-tier and orchestrated way. So if you want to use another configuration manager, that's no problem for us. What Ansible will help you do is begin to glue all of these disparate pieces together in order to automate the progress or process by which applications are ultimately deployed in your environment. Many people are doing this today. They're doing it without Ansible, for sure.
Right.
They're doing it with shell scripts. They're doing it with the combination of Puppet, Chef, and shell scripts. Perhaps they've got some other automation language in there that is helping orchestrate some of these things from one of the former big three kind of IT providers like HPSA or the Opsware product or BMC Blade Logic. But the point is that there are many different ways to do this, and Ansible is but one way to easily help organizations kind of bring all of this together and glue it together.
Well, so here's another question that has been posed. So I've been called on my assertion that DevOps is not a product, and we're talking about Ansible, and I'm going to actually address this one. So in fact, the question was, so this webinar is actually a sales pitch for Ansible. No, it's a sales pitch for it's a sales pitch for certification, and I'll get to that presently. But in fact, I want to clarify a little bit why we're talking about Ansible. There's a couple of reasons. One is that it is an enabling technology for making that move into DevOps. Okay, that's one of the key reasons is that the functionality is functionality that is built with that sort of model in mind. But then the second reason, and somewhat more subtle, is that I think to understand the functionality and design of Ansible is to also understand at some level what DevOps is about, right? Because it's about the communication. It's about the automation. It's about the transparency and visibility and reusability and all of those things that you were talking about just a moment ago. And so in a sense, I say again, if you kind of get what it is that Ansible does, you also kind of get what it is that you're trying to do if you're talking about going to DevOps. And I think that's kind of where you're going here with this particular slide is that it sort of expresses this idea of, where do you start and where do you go? So I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I wanted to kind of touch on those 2 points because it felt like a good place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate that. And it is important to say that Ansible certainly is not DevOps. I think Ansible, like a lot of products, is a piece that fits into the overall process. And like I said, there are a number of ways to do this. And there's, heck, there probably are wrong ways, but the reality is if you're able to do something that works well for your organization, that gives you this automated flow between points, that's awesome. And hey, frankly, we don't sell Ansible. Ansible is open source. Ansible is free for you to use. So we would just challenge you to say, hey, look, if you are interested in beginning to implement a DevOps continuum, we would argue that Ansible is a great way to do that, but it is certainly not the only way. What many of our customers and organizations that are using Ansible, of which there are millions and millions worldwide, many of whom aren't paying us, and that's okay. What's important is that folks are using tools that work for their organization and that are able to accomplish the goals at hand. So of course we're going to be a little bit biased towards Ansible, and as Randy put it, we're talking about Ansible certification, or we're talking about certification as a whole, or DevOps certification. But the point is that for organizations that have a bunch of existing IT that are looking to implement DevOps, either in a greenfield environment or to help migrate their processes in their existing environment to be more DevOps-centric, Ansible is a great way to do that. For all the reasons on this particular slide, I don't need to continue to beat on them. But hopefully this isn't coming across too salesy. But what we really wanted to do is talk about how certainly it's a piece to the puzzle. We think a very important piece, but it's certainly not the only way to do it.
No, and that's very true. But again, for me, it sort of encapsulates the process, right? Is that where do you start? If I'm saying that this is a continuum, you have to start somewhere. And where you start is where you are today. The systems that you have today. It's the people you have today. And what is the next step? What is the thing that can get you nudged along the continuum? And so, automate your existing processes. Manage legacy
Exactly.
like DevOps. And this is something, you and I were talking about a couple of days ago, is that, we assume generally that when somebody's talking about DevOps, they're talking about these sort of microservices architected applications. But there's a lot of legacy applications out there that, companies are banking the business on, right? And
Exactly.
that's not those apps are not going to turn into a microservices bundle overnight. They may have no plans to do that whatsoever, but at the same time, they do want to be able to they do want to be able to hasten that process of getting features and fixes out to their users. So I really like this approach of modernized migration and DevOps. Is that there's a plan, there is a way for organizations to move forward. All right, so
Exactly.
So I get to the sales pitch. Is DevOps and Red Hat certification. Okay, so first of all, many of the people who join my webinars are people who have already been certified by Red Hat, and of course, a big shout out and hello to all of the Red Hat certified professionals who have joined us today. There are also people who have joined us who may have no knowledge whatsoever about Red Hat certification. Like many IT vendors, we have a certification program for professionals. Unlike many IT vendors, our approach to certification is based 100% on hands-on testing. Every single exam for every Red Hat certification, no exceptions, is a performance-based exam. It's a hands-on exam, whether you're testing your knowledge and skills in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you're going to be working with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We are testing your ability to write enterprise integration patterns using Red Hat Fuse. Guess what? You're going to be using Fuse, or testing your ability to write business rules using BRMS. I can go through the entire list here. Everything we do is very hands-on, okay? And that's something that's different for our program from other programs that are out there. We do more of this hands-on testing than pretty much any other IT vendor out there. And so, this approach to hands-on testing means that we provide a lot of value with the certification because people who carry the certification actually can do the work, okay? Being able to memorize multiple choice questions and answers does not necessarily mean you are able to do the work. And so this creates value for the IT professional because, if you've earned the certification, you've really gone through the drill and you have a credential that the industry understands is earned through hands-on testing. And that really allows you to differentiate yourself from other IT professionals. If you're somebody who's an IT manager and you're looking to hire people or perhaps develop your team, then, it's a credential that you can look for and it can help you make those hiring and management decisions. Not saying that you hinge the decision entirely on it. No, I mean, guys, we're not certifying whether people have good work habits or a good work ethic or whether they're easy to work with or that they have good communication skills. There's a whole lot of things that you have to consider as a manager. But we're trying to help with a tool to help you assess whether somebody has the technical skills. So this is a really useful tool for the IT manager, and it's a useful tool for the service provider, meaning if you're a hosting company, if you're a cloud company, if you're a consultancy, if you are selling services, IT services to others, having your team be certified, in fact, by Red Hat is a value add. Okay, so just a very quick view of sort of the value of certification. We are expanding the availability of our certification exams worldwide through expanding Red Hat individual exams, which are available in select markets where you can just schedule the time that you want to take it and go in and take your hands-on exam. What I particularly want to let people know about is we have just announced this. The Red Hat Certified Architect with a DevOps concentration. Now, to earn Red Hat Certified Architect, you have to either earn Red Hat Certified Engineer or Red Hat Certified Developer, JBoss Developer, and you have to also earn an additional 5 credentials. Now, we have a whole lot of credentials that you can choose from, but last year we introduced this concept of concentrations where we have recommendations, okay? So it's not a requirement that you have to get this 5. Maybe there's 4 that you think are really useful and there's some 5th that's not on this list that you would think would be more useful for your career or the organization that you're working for or, whatever. There's a lot of flexibility there. The idea here is the concentration is a set of credentials that if you have them, is going to represent that you really have a broad and deep knowledge that's useful in the area, in this case, DevOps. And so what we're looking at here is the Certificate of Expertise in Platform as a Service, which would represent your ability to set up and manage an OpenShift enterprise environment. The Certificate of Expertise in Containerized Application Development. How do you manage containerized applications? Okay, it's not actually application development per se. It's, how do you package that up in a container? The Certificate of Expertise in Configuration Management, which is actually focuses mostly on Puppet because there's a lot of Puppet out there in the market. And then of particular interest, and we have another one on container management, which is working with Red Hat Atomic Host. That's going to be coming soon here in the next couple of months. And then the one, of course, that I'm very excited about is we are very soon going to be offering a Red Hat Certificate of Expertise in Ansible automation. And I think this is one that, if you're going to look at this list of 5, this would be a great one to start with because it is so broad in its application. Even if you're not in an organization looking to do DevOps, Ansible could be a really useful tool, and it actually starts to solve a lot of those broader questions that every IT organization faces. So, look into this. We have a lot about this online. We have, videos on YouTube. I would welcome people to take a look and learn a little bit more about the RHCA with concentration on DevOps and RHCA in general. And so, with that, I can advance my slide. I have one other thing I want to mention, and that is that if you are interested in something like the Red Hat Certified Architect and pursuing that, that's a, unless you already know all that stuff, you'll probably want to get training, and that's an awful lot of training that one would have to undertake. And so I'm going to suggest that if you do want to pursue this path, if you do want to sort of develop that sort of cross-technology skills, consider the Red Hat Learning subscription, which basically gives you unlimited access to all of our online courses, all of them, every single one of them, and our online video courses. You get it for a year, 24/7 access to the content. You get up to 400 hours of remote lab time. This is a really, really great way to, sort of get your skills and build your skills and work towards that RHCA credential. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So let's take a look. A question was asked about Red Hat Learning Subscription. Are exams included? They are not at this time. Please stay tuned. Another question. Right now we are deciding between Puppet, Chef, Ansible. Let's see, which is why I ask if Ansible can do CM. So Justin, I'm going to let you handle that one.
Oh, you don't want to field that for me?
I do not.
Yeah, so Ansible really does four things. So it's an orchestration, like a workflow orchestration tool. It is a configuration manager, it's an app deployment tool, and it is a provisioning tool. So you can use all four of those. You can use any one of those, and we have users out there in organizations that are doing all permutations of that. But functionally, yes, Ansible can be used as a configuration management tool. There is nothing that you can do in Chef or Puppet that you cannot also do with Ansible in a combination of Ansible Tower. So from a configuration management point of view, absolutely, definitely doable and a very common use case for Ansible.
Great. Another question came in. How much does a learning subscription cost? I actually can't answer that in a good way because we actually get people on these webinars from all over the world, working in different currencies and different prices. And so I would take a look at, at redhat.com in your region and see what it's priced there. But I will give you the very broad rule of thumb that for the price of about 2 of our online courses, bought separately a la carte, you can get the whole shebang. So, take a look and see. Another listener says some concentrations have more than 5 certificates in them. Let me clarify. If we list more than 5 certificates, it means choose 5 from among the list. So there might be some concentrations that we list more than 5, meaning there's more than 5 options that we think are relevant to that particular concentration, but you only have to earn 5 beyond either your RHCE or your RHCJD. Looking on. Unattended OS installations using Ansible. This is a question that's asked Justin. I think the answer there is a pretty much unqualified yes, but do you want to maybe elaborate on what Ansible can bring beyond that in terms of sort of OS installations and unattended?
Sure. So every major cloud platform and most of the major Vert platforms out there have the ability to do callbacks to other tools once something has been provisioned. So whether you are doing bare metal, i.e. you're creating an empty VM or a piece of bare metal and you're pixie booting it with a minimal install, the last step of that would be a outreach to Ansible and Ansible Tower, and we would apply whatever baseline was appropriate. So there are a number of different ways to do that, but yeah, absolutely, Ansible can easily tie into an unattended installation environment.
Right. So another question is, one of the most appealing aspects of some other configuration management is that once we've defined a desired state, the tool enforces it. What about Ansible? It seems that it's able to push configuration, but what about enforcing configurations and fixing configuration drifts?
Yep, so there is certainly a little bit of a challenge in that we have a pure push model, so there is no agent on the machine to keep track of what that exact state should be, but we would solve that by just rerunning the runs themselves from Tower, or you could potentially cron it and run it locally as well if you wanted to. So we've got a number of different ways to solve that particular use case, and candidly, that's a fairly common question that we have for people that are familiar with some of the configuration managers out there that do have agents. So yeah, we can certainly address that effectively using either Tower or cron.
Cool. Another question came up is that we already have Puppet Enterprise for build automation, configuration, um, and uh, and also managing infrastructure efficiently. Can this be easily migrated uh, to Ansible without any impact? And if yes, what is the advantage in moving to Ansible? Well, and I guess I would say before I let you turn you loose on this, Justin, is that I think if you're going to migrate, you better hope there's a positive impact. And so let's say, can it be easily migrated without a negative impact?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, I guess Justin, what would you pose to a shop that is invested into Puppet as sort of the incremental advantage of moving to
Sure.
Ansible or introducing Ansible, right?
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of key things. Chances are, if you're looking at Puppet in your environment, again, great configuration manager. I don't want to take anything away from either Puppet or Chef as a config manager. The challenge ends up being when you go to deploy more complicated applications that are perhaps more than one tier, or even if they're one tier, if you have any part of that configuration deployment that needs to happen in a specific order, that's effectively impossible to easily do with some of the other tools. And that's where the orchestration capability of Ansible really steps in. So I would argue if you take a look at what you're doing with Puppet Enterprise today, chances are if you are doing any more of the advanced kind of workflow orchestration stuff, you're doing it with some shim of some variety. You either have a different product or you're using shell scripts in order to make all the Puppet deploys happen in the right order. Ansible can replace that component very, very quickly. And then moving forward, what you'll find is two things. One, that as you're using Ansible and Puppet alongside one another, it's perfectly acceptable, and again, we have many organizations that are using Ansible in this manner to continue to manage configurations in Puppet. It's what they're familiar with. It's where they've got their expertise. That's totally fine. And then other teams might begin to use Ansible to do some more or different things from an orchestration point of view. The other flip side of this is that organizations that are using both will see pretty rapidly the value. One of the big aspects of value that Ansible brings that I chatted about before was that everyone can use it. So with Puppet and certainly Chef, it really does require some domain-specific knowledge to a much higher level than what Ansible requires. So the difference is that in teams that are using, say, Chef or Puppet, there tend to be a few number of or minimal number of people that are being tasked with automating things or defining those configurations. Whereas with Ansible, the potential community of use within your organization is much, much wider. Because everyone can use it, and it becomes much easier to make these things portable, and it becomes much easier to communicate back and forth what's going on within the environment. So that's one of the biggest reasons why people would start to use Ansible, is because everyone can actually use it.
Right. So we are at the top of the hour. There's one last question about how can I improve my skills as a beginner in DevOps? I see a lot of technologies. How can I be prepared? And I guess I would say again, let's give some thought to the Red Hat training options that we offer, including especially the Red Hat Learning subscription. Again, it gives you access to labs and all of those exams that I described and certifications do have courses associated with them, and those courses actually do work from the sort of the premise of what is it that you might actually want to do in the real world here? How are these being used in today's operating environments? So do look into those training options. Look for something very shortly on Ansible. Also, we've got some great courses on OpenShift Enterprise and some of these other technologies. And I think the key is to understand sort of the tool set you have, but then also understand that the tool set is not DevOps. Okay, it's the thing that allows you to do that, but you're going to have to actually understand the philosophy and the practices of DevOps. It's not enough to have the toolbox. So anyway, on that note, we are at the top of the hour, and so thank you everybody for attending. Apologies if we couldn't get to your question. Have a good day or a good evening, as the case may be.